Welcome back to The Move, where I've been through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and in today's episode, we're talking about that one time in the Bible where Abraham makes it pretty clear that he's against interracial marriage. If you're wondering what in the world we're talking about, we're looking at Genesis chapter 24, verses 1 through 9. My guest, as always, well, maybe not always, but my guest for today's episode is, as always, the amazing Pastor Ben Williams. Pastor, good to see you. How you doing, buddy?
Great. You know,
Interracial marriage, something that is very important in my life. I'm very, very grateful. I remember watching that one film. What was it was like a court case, something. The last name was Love, where it was like there was this couple. I want to say it was like in West Virginia or something like that, where um, basically they were at risk of going to prison because they were in an interracial marriage. And one of the things that I noticed over the last handful of years when it came to my career on YouTube was that this actually was a question fairly often, which is weird for me because, growing up in Southern California, it's a pretty diverse place. I had friends of every kind of race, as it were, and interracial marriages or interracial relationships was a very normal thing. And yet I would get this question on the YouTube Q&A side of things when people would ask, what does the Bible say about interracial marriages? And I'm wondering if they were thinking about this story. I never really put two and two together. I'm always like, why would people ask this question at all? But I guess there's kind of a precedent for it where it seems like through this narrative, as well as other parts in the Bible where God's like, listen, don't marry outside of your clan. I guess that is a thing. And so maybe this is the point of the passage. I don't know if it is or is not, but let's talk about it. Interracial marriages, how do you feel about them, Pastor Ben? Is good thing, bad thing? What do you think?
I feel very positively about interracial marriages.
Okay.
My sister is married to a young man from Kenya, and they have a great relationship. I love David. I love Callie. So I'm pro interracial marriages. Yeah,
Good to know. For the
yeah,
record.
for the record. And I think that the Bible also is pro interracial marriages, even though maybe Abraham wasn't in this situation. But I think that if we look closer at the story, and this is a thread that has been pulling throughout all of Genesis, is this keeping of a line so that the Messiah can come through it. And it's not as much about Abraham being like, the Canaanites, they're a different race than us, and we need pure bloods. No, he's not one of those. Like, he's not crazy. But he's
Okay.
actually just realizing that there's been a curse that's been laid upon the Canaanites. The Canaanites worship
Hmm.
other gods. At different times, the Canaanites have sacrificed children to these gods. These Canaanites are of a completely different spiritual place and practice. I don't think that
Hmm.
if the Canaanites were also people of God, I don't think Abraham would have at all had a problem with uh,
Hmm.
with his son marrying them. But the problem is there's this worry that if your children go and they start to mingle with other nations, then it becomes a problem because then the spirituality of the nations will mix. And eventually what happens often, and we'll see this later in Genesis and we'll see it throughout the entire Bible, when the people of Israel go and they start to intermarry with people of other faiths, they start to follow the other faiths instead of God. And so this isn't at all
Hmm.
about the race as much it is about trying to keep Isaac away from being an idolater.
Hmm. This is interesting because you see in previous stories, it's just like Abraham is so willing to kind of compromise
Mhm.
for what's expedient.
Yeah.
And it seems like he's starting to learn his lesson so much to the point where it's like he really wants his son to get married. But if he can't find the right person from the right kind of like,
Mhm.
I don't know, selection pool, he's like, all right, well then, you don't have to like take this vow of finding my son a partner so seriously.
Yeah.
Like he's willing to let go, it seems like, of the things that he wants in order to
Mm.
maintain some resemblance to principle.
Yeah, and there's also some level of faith growth that we see here because back in the day, I don't know how many days ago it aired, but you and we talked about a place where Abraham had these questions, and he had questions on, man, God, I'm not seeing this. Sorry if you hear the chickens; they love to live.
Yeah,
They
I'm
basically
laughing
live in my
because
room. Basic. So beforehand, Abraham always was having this dichotomy of this kind of like tension in his mind of, well, God promised this, but I'm not seeing it, and so now I need to compromise, like you said, to try and get the thing because maybe or maybe not God isn't actually going to be faithful to his promise. But here it's
Hmm.
interesting because Abraham is sitting there and he's thinking, God has told me that I'm going to be a person of many, many children. And right now I have Isaac, but I know that it needs to be
Right.
extended. So that means that there is going to be a woman for Isaac. Okay, I know that. And I also know that I am supposed to have this land. So being in this land is important. And if it's important to God, then it's going to happen. So then when he's making this
Mm,
oath to his oldest servant, there's no kind of fear in him that it's not actually going to come about. Like he's not afraid anymore.
mm,
He's not like, well, I need to compromise and let Isaac go away, or I need to compromise and let it be a Canaanite woman because who knows if God's going to come through. But the two stipulations that he has are stipulations that are being very strict to the word that God has already given him. He's saying, I don't need to
mm,
actually worry because the promise is that there's going to be many children, and the promise is that this is my land. And so if I
mm,
stay faithful to knowing that God's promise is good, then everything's going to be okay. I don't need to like go out here and mess up my life and mess up the life of my son because I don't think God's faithful to his promise. And so there's been this
mm.
huge faith journey, and this is I think I could be wrong. I think this is the last time Abraham we actually have dialogue from him. And it's beautiful to
Oh,
see.
wow.
I
Okay.
could be wrong. I don't know if I had to we'll see later on. But there's this beauty in the first few times we see Abraham, we see him struggling with, well, I don't know if God's actually faithful, so I need to step out and do it my own way. But here it's so clear
Mm,
that he's come such a long way in his faith journey and says, now, I don't need to compromise left or right because I know God's word is true. And it's just
mm.
beautiful to see it. It's like the end of the character arc, if you will. Like he's grown so
Absolutely.
much.
Yeah, and what a cool way to kind of go out, right? Like
Hmm.
the testimony of your life, and I love this that Abraham's story is one where he's made a lot of mistakes, he's had a lot of triumphs, like, and yet at the end of his life, he's able to come through it all, kind of really learning the lessons that he was meant to learn. I love the way that the Bible is describing Abraham right now. It says that he's a very old man, and then it says that the Lord had blessed him in every way. Like how cool of a way to go out. Like that's your testimony. It's like God blessed you in every single way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you think about it too, like from the beginning, it's what God said he would do. And I think it's really
Mm.
cool to see that over and over, Abraham has done some dumb stuff. If you've been listening, I mean, he's like given away his wife two different times. Like
Yeah.
he's gone and he's gotten with a servant that really ruined his household for a long time, ruined his relationship with his wife. And there's just so many things that he's done wrong. And yet, since the beginning, God said, I am going to bless you with all of these things. And at the end, even though he's messed
Mm.
up, I mean, let's say even just a conservative 1,000 times in his life, he's come to this point and he can still look back. The Bible can still look back and say, God was faithful to his end, the end of his bargain, even when Abraham so
Mm.
often wasn't. And it's a lot of courage to me because often I think back on these people and I say, yeah, they were blessed. They were blessed so much,
Mm.
but they were blessed because he's the father of faith. He was counted as righteous. But look at me. I mean, I mess up all of the time, and realizing that
Right.
the same reason why Abraham was still blessed even when he was unfaithful is the reason that I'm blessed when I'm unfaithful. And that's because it is
Mm.
all contingent upon the love and the faith of the father, not of Abraham always making the right decision. And it's comforting to me to know that in the same way that he remained blessed through the faithfulness of God, I can also remain blessed through the
Mhm.
faithfulness of God, even when I mess up.
I love that the passage talks about how like there's an angel that's going to go ahead of you
Hmm.
and like is going to work on your behalf because those of you guys who are listening who grew up in the same kind of faith context as Ben and I, we might have been fed a version of like God's relating to us that was conditional on did we do all the right things.
Yeah.
And I think about this one statement where it talks about how like when you go into the movie theaters, this is I don't know, this is a statement that's been quoted a lot of times in Advent churches, right? Like you go to a movie theater, your angel waits outside. And it's like this fear-based idea that, when you screw up, God abandons you and leaves you to your own devices. Like,
Yikes.
no, no, no. Abraham messed up a whole bunch, and yet God's angels are still working. Like God is still faithful, even when you screw up. And I don't know. I'm so glad that the Bible paints a different picture of who God
Hmm.
is, and that when the way that he relates to us is not conditional on us getting it right all the time. Like
Yeah.
that's just so reassuring that we can have confidence, we can have faith that we are okay, that we're held securely in the arms of God.
Yeah. And I think, and it's beautiful to just see that even though Abraham was the father of the faith since the beginning, like this revelation that we're talking about right now, it took him a while to
Mhm.
get to. And I think
Yeah.
it's experiences with God and experiences with faith, or even at times lack of faith, that we actually build into this place. Like I don't want anyone to think that like right now you need to be perfect in your faith of like, oh yeah, I know God said it, so then I'm 100% and I'm never gonna lack, because like you might, I might,
Mhm.
but that
Mhm.
even that doesn't disqualify us from a growing relationship of faith with Jesus. And I mean, who knows? Maybe by the end of our life, maybe by, if you're, real strong, maybe by tomorrow, whenever it may be for you, like there's going to be a come time where you can look back and say, man, my faith has really grown in Jesus, and I'm able
Mm.
to like just trust him more. Because even at this
Mhm.
point, we're not even commending Abraham for making the right decision, I don't think. I think what I'm commending
Mm-mm.
him for is just believing that God's word is true. Because that's when I look
Yeah.
at like a mountain of faith, or like a huge patriarch of faith in the Bible, or even that I've known, it's not about the mistakes they've made or haven't made, or even in the moment, but it's about the person who's like, no, 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 God said this, and so I believe it. God said this, so
Mm.
I know it's true.
Yeah. So something that we've kind of stumbled across over the last handful of months or whatever, for me has been a lesson where it's like we don't have to put faith in our own faith.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that sometimes we think that I need to have more faith or I need to have stronger faith in order for things to come through in my life. It's like, no, no. When that's the paradigm where it's like, oh man, I need more faith. I need a stronger faith. We're revealing that our faith is put in
Hmm.
ourselves. Our faith is put in our own faith. And in what you're saying here is like that's not at all the thing that we need to rely upon. We don't need to depend on. And this is why the lesson is like, listen, even if your faith is as small as a mustard seed, like this is kind of the point that Jesus is making is like, listen, your faith can be small and feeble and weak, but that's okay because it's not about your faith or the strength of your faith or the quantity of your faith. It's more important, what are you placing your faith
Yeah.
in? Because if you're placing your faith in His word, then you can't go wrong.
Yeah. Because I mean, that's where it's beautiful that our lives are hidden with Christ. Sorry, we're jumping way ahead with that reference. But our lives are hidden with Christ because it's no longer dependent upon me. I'm no
Mhm.
longer the pillar of my own life or salvation, but my pillar is actually hidden somewhere where it is untouchable and unshakable, which is in Jesus
Absolutely.
Christ.
Absolutely. Hey, before we go, I was wondering if there's anything here. There's a really weird practice that I read in this passage
Mhm.
where it's like you put your hand under the dude's thigh.
Yep,
I
yep,
don't know if you've
yep.
ever done that before. Is that something that you've done? You stuck your hand under some dude's thigh and made a
You
promise? Is that
know,
because that just feels
yeah, no, it's a
awkward?
little weird. I think in theology school, some like there was times where we would like joke around and like you'd like grab somebody's thigh and be like, "Promise me something." But yeah, no, it's kind of this. It's a practice that was older, and as I was reading about it a little bit, there's not a huge amount written about it, but there
Hmm.
is some, and it's just this idea of, I mean, Abraham's on his deathbed, and so he's kind of making a deathbed oath where putting your
Oh,
hand under the thigh and under the thigh is less about like, I'm going to come after you. And it's more pointing to, if you break this oath, my children are coming for you.
oh shoot!
Yeah.
That's what that
So
means.
Abraham's like, I'm dying. So I guess the threat of me coming after you is not super great. So guess what? My kids will come after you, and yours after
Oh
me
man,
if I break it. So yeah, it's a little
shoot.
interesting, little promise, little kid battle,
All
I guess.
right. Okay. Well, now
Now
we
we
know.
know.
So, over the last handful of weeks, we've been letting you guys know about the book Free from Sin that Jonathan has just released. And one thing that we want to let you guys know is that we're actually going to be starting a book club. So, if you enjoy reading and going through books together as a team, we're actually going to go at the pace of just like one chapter per week, which is really, really easy. The chapters are like 4 or 5 pages a piece. So, it's really short reading. But if you want to be a part of a community that's kind of digesting these chapters and these concepts and discussing them together, then we'd love to have you. All you got to do is text the word book club to the number 808-204-4372. That's 808-204-4372. Again, just text the word book club and we'll send you a link, let you know on Sunday mornings when the book club is starting.